My guest today on Dan's Talks is Mia Certic. She is the president of the Montauk Historical Society, which certainly has probably more incredible history about it than the Hamptons, which already has a lot of great history about it. And a lot of it is posted up in the particular building, which is directly behind her, which was authorized by George Washington, just to give you an idea. But I think it's just a Zoom image, correct? You're actually indoors?
I'm actually indoors, yeah, during the day, but I thought I would put this up because it's so nice and festive. And I just want to say I'm actually the executive director of the Historical Society.
Good.
The president is Joe Gaviola.
I guess it's a board and you're running it.
Yeah.
Okay, we got that straight. Where are you from? How did you get to be running the Historical Society? And how long have you been doing that?
I've been working for the Historical Society for about 2.5 years. I started right at the very beginning of COVID in April of 2020. I've kind of lived all around in various places. I was born in New Jersey. My parents bought a Leisure-Rama in 1964, so original owners. And so I've been coming to Montauk virtually all my life.
That's a house.
That is a house. Yeah, that's a house in a development that ended up, it was a fantastic idea. It was designed by Andrew Geller, the architect, brilliantly designed, completely furnished by Macy's. You could go into Macy's and buy it, and it was a fantastic idea. But only 200 of them were built. I think they ended up losing money on it, but it turned into a wonderful neighborhood and a community, and it's still standing.
I believe they sold the houses for $14,000.
I think they ranged from even less than that to about 18,000 for the super modern one. But they were very, very cleverly designed, and it was a really great idea because it made owning a summer house accessible to so many people. And one of the things was it was fully furnished, so you didn't have to say, "Oh my God, now I bought this house and now I have to furnish it." It came with everything. There were 3 different colored choices that you could make, and the furniture would match and the towels would match, and it was great.
This is out by the fishing village, looking out, and they're actually waterfront on Long Island Sound there.
That's right. It's right along Soundview, right near Culloden Point.
So when did you first start coming out here? And it was summers, I presume.
1964.
And what did you like about it? How old were? Well, you could tell me how old you were at that time.
I was 7 years old, and it was an instant neighborhood. There were a lot of kids, and we all came and we spent the whole summer here. And so we had these really intense friendships that you have from people that you spend your summers with year after year after year. And there are very few of us who still own the houses now from the original group, but we're still in touch with a lot of the people who were our friends when we were 7 and 8 years old. And in fact, one of my best friends in the world was a Montauk friend, and she and I are still really close. And recently, she lives in London now, as did I. So we've spent tons of time together for the past. However, how many years is it since 1964? It's a lot of years.
Yes. So what did you get interested in history? Did you study? What did you study in school?
I did not study history. I have a degree, a double degree in English and Spanish literature from the University of London. But I've always been interested in history, and particularly in mysteries, and how do you get to the nub of a story, and how do you find out what really happened? My professional background is mostly as a writer. I used to do a lot of advertising, copywriting, and I've written a couple of screenplays, and I've done a little bit of journalism, and I've done a couple of series of documentaries for European TV.
And what got you interested in history in Montauk?
When I was a little kid, my parents bought me a book by Jeanette Edwards Rattray called Ship Ashore.
Right, I have.
And it was about shipwrecks.
Yeah.
And I was interested because we lived right near Culloden Point, and there was a big thing about there was a section about the Culloden. But I think I've just always been interested in history.
Tell me a little bit about what the Historical Society is up to.
Sure. Big stuff, actually, at the Historical Society these days. First of all, I like to say, when you're driving through the Hamptons and you go through those beautiful villages, you're so aware of the history because it looks historical. Yeah. And you come to Montauk and it looks as though it just sort of sprang up so recently. And I think people don't realize how many thousands of years of history we really have in Montauk, starting, of course, with the Montaukets and the indigenous people. And so the Historical Society does have a small Indian museum, the Montauk Indian Museum, which focuses mainly on pre-contact life. So artifacts that are thousands of years old, and how did people live in Montauk before there was contact with Europeans. And we also have, of course, Second House Museum, which is the oldest house still standing in Montauk. It was rebuilt in 1797. That was, of course, at that time, the proprietors of East Hampton were using Montauk as pasture land for cattle and sheep mainly. And they were the three houses that were established for keepers. The first house, which was originally called Hither House, was where they took down the numbers of how many cows and sheep you were bringing in. And then you went on to Second House, which was at that time called the House at Fort Pond. And that was where they separated the cattle from the sheep. And the sheep stayed around near Second House. And then the cattle went further closer to the lighthouse to Third House. And so we run Second House. It's owned by the town of East Hampton. The town of East Hampton is doing a spectacular, meticulous, historic restoration of that house, which...
These were also inns for travelers.
I'm sorry?
These were also inns for travelers.
Yes, they were. And by the 19th century, the inn part of it actually kind of became more important after Arthur Benson came here. And certainly Second House was a very popular place to stay.
Describe what Arthur Benson bought and what he did.
Arthur Benson bought virtually all of Montauk in the mid to late 1800s, I think. I would say 1871, was it? Something like that?
Brooklyn millionaire.
I'm sorry?
A Brooklyn millionaire.
A Brooklyn millionaire. And he loved Montauk for its wildness. And he kind of he used it as his private fishing and hunting land. And he's responsible for the houses we call the Seven Sisters, which are these beautiful Stanford white houses, which apparently were built without kitchens because everyone had their meals at the clubhouse.
Right.
And so I'm sure they had wonderful times out here. And that was really how Arthur Benson wanted Montauk to continue. He wanted it to stay a sort of fishing, hunting paradise for a select number of people.
Yeah, that site, that area is on its way it's out of Ditch Plains. Mm-hmm. And about 20 years after that, at which time I believe some of the houses were abandoned, but that's where Teddy Roosevelt was encamped in Ditch Plains.
Well, Teddy Roosevelt, his when he was here for Camp Wyckoff in 1898 after the Spanish-American War, with so anywhere between 24 and 28,000 soldiers, approximately 2,000 of whom were his Rough Riders, and then another maybe 2,000 were the Buffalo Soldiers, and then the rest of them were the rest of the soldiers from that war. Yeah. all of Montauk was this, as you, I mean, you've seen the pictures, this massive encampment, these incredible, you know, the bare hills of Montauk were covered with white tents. And how the army managed to put all of that together, basically creating what is now like a normal summer population for us in Montauk. I mean, we get about 30,000 people in the summer, right? This was close to that. And yet there were very, very few people living in Montauk full time at that time. The Indians had, you know, been coerced into leaving. And it was pretty much the people in the three houses and the lighthouse.
Why did they come to Montauk? Soldiers.
The soldiers?
Yeah.
The soldiers were in really bad physical condition after the Spanish-American War. They were suffering from various diseases. Some of them were contagious, others were not. But at that time, they believed they were contagious. They believed that yellow fever and malaria were contagious diseases. And a lot of them were malnourished, wounded, generally in terrible shape. And so they turned Montauk into a giant quarantine camp for the soldiers to recuperate. And they were not here long. You know, they built this camp, fortunately, the railroad had come in at that point because Arthur Benson's children sold part of Montauk to build the railroad, to bring the railroad out here. And that made it possible for equipment and whatever they needed to build the camps to come in. And the army threw this city up, using bringing things in by train and by boat, and using mule carriages to take things from one part of Montauk to another. Pretty amazing.
Yeah, and President McKinley visited him.
President McKinley visited, and there are pictures of Camp Wyckoff are wonderful. We have some of them at the lighthouse, and there is a fantastic book written by a guy called Jeff Heatley.
Splendid Little War. That's the one I know.
I meant specifically about Camp Wyckoff. It's called Bully, and it's
yes,
yeah. The Historical Society published it originally, I think in '98, and we're now putting a new edition out thanks to a grant that we got from the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation. So Jeff Heatley is adding a couple of chapters, and we're also adding an index so that it can be used for research. And it's a fantastic book that's a compilation of newspaper articles and letters, and it tells the story chronologically of Camp Wyckoff from the first time people had the idea of creating this quarantine camp until the end, which was a very short period of time. It was only a few months.
Where is the collection housed, the Historical Society's collection?
Our collection, our archives?
Yeah.
We have a lot of our items are in the Montauk Library, and we have other things at the lighthouse itself and here at the Fisher House as well. But I would say the majority of our archive are held by the.
So you were telling me about things that are underway. So continue with that.
So we are planning to reopen Second House when the historic restoration is completed, which we think will be in 2024 now. And that will open up as a combination of historic house and we're focusing on that particular time of Montauk history up until around 1886, between sort of the colonial time really in Montauk history. And we also plan to have a lot of community activities at Second House that we sort of exploring crafts and activities that were done. We have a lovely little garden, so we're planning to plant a series of berries, because berry picking was one of the things that brought people to Montauk. It was a big tourist attraction. People would come to Montauk and they would stay at Second House and they would pick berries. So as we replant, we're removing the invasive non-native trees from the property and replacing with berries and a little apple orchard. And we'll be having, cider making and jam making and, knitting and various other colonial activities. That's in the pipes. And then, of course, we also own the lighthouse. which we've been sort of managing since 1987, and then got a deed to in 1996. And that's, the jewel in the crown.
Yes.
We're obviously
There's
very
still a
proud of
light
it.
for Mariners, though, up top.
I'm sorry?
There's still a light for Mariners up top, yes?
Yes, there is. And that is still a federal aid to navigation. And but you played a very, very big role in the preservation of the lighthouse with your light-ins and calling attention to the plight that it was in the 1960s, when the erosion was so severe that the Coast Guard was considering abandoning it.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people helped out to solve that problem.
So we have up at the lighthouse, I don't know if you know this, but we are just completing a complete restoration of the tower. And if you look in the picture, you can see how you can actually see the individual sandstone stones of the tower. That's because we've removed all the many layers of paint, have chiseled out all of the mortar that was in there, because it was actually inappropriate type of mortar that was damaging the sandstone more. We've replaced that with lime putty mortar. And it's been a very long and expensive process, which we're thrilled to have received substantial grants from the New York State Parks and from the Robert David Lyon Gardner Foundation, and also from extremely generous donors who responded to this need. People love the lighthouse, and I think everybody understood that this was something that had to happen, because it was actually the structure was beginning to be threatened by the damage that had been done by the 220 years of storms and wind and heat and cold and so on and so forth.
You said, but you'll be able to paint it the colors that it's always been?
It's going to go back to the original colors with the original day mark. The process is actually referred to as recoating rather than painting. It's a very, very special mineral product that allows breathing, allows the, sort of air to enter and so on. So it's not as, it's not like paint. It's a specific kind of substance that they use for this kind of building. And that will be done next year. We're expecting to have a major ribbon cutting next summer. And also we will be celebrating the completion of a massive revetment that the Army Corps of Engineers and the state have been working on for the past, maybe year and a half. And that is it's about a $38 million project. People in Montauk will have heard and seen the trucks of rocks going up, to the lighthouse, rumbling away. But that's almost finished now, and it's going to be terrific.
What is the hours? The public can visit the lighthouse, and can they climb up top?
Well, at the moment we are closed for the season, but up until last weekend, you were able to go up top, or actually a couple weeks ago, you were able to climb the tower. And it will reopen in the spring.
What time will it reopen in the spring?
We'll see. We're very weather dependent. It's a funny thing. There's almost like a little microclimate at the lighthouse. The wind is stronger there. That hill can be really, really steep. It can be very slippery, and so we play it by ear. But I think we open 7 days a week in April. We're usually open weekends in March, but we will announce that when we know.
And there's a little museum in there now.
There's a wonderful museum there. Yeah.
And talk about that for a little bit.
The Montauk Point Lighthouse Museum has grown gradually over the years, and it's a really complete history of the Montauk Point Lighthouse, which includes the original document signed by George Washington that commissioned the lighthouse's building. We have original letters from Ezra Lamadieu, who was the surveyor who chose the site, and a letter signed by Thomas Jefferson when he was Secretary of State. So we have we have our little documents room. We have another room that's devoted to the erosion process and what we've done to combat the erosion. A lot of that room is dedicated to Georgina Reed, who was the miraculous woman from Up Island who
River, I believe.
I'm not sure where I know she was born in Trieste, and she was a fabric designer. She was not an engineer, but she came up with this system for protecting a bluff that was exposed to this kind of pounding from the ocean and erosion. And with her band of happy volunteers over on every weekend for I don't know how many years in the late 60s, early 70s, they were really trying to preserve the bluff, and I think because of the success of that, and because of the success of the light-in and the attention that the Montauk Pioneer brought to the problem of the lighthouse, the Coast Guard finally agreed to work on a revetment. So we started having, they built a revetment back in 1990, I believe, and then it's been added to over the years.
Are there any other historic pieces of Montauk that a visitor can go to and run by the Historic Society?
Well, we now have the town of East Hampton, using CPF funds, has purchased the Carl Fisher House, which was the house that Carl Fisher built for himself, high on a hill, not too far from the Montauk Manor. And that's not open to the public yet, but it will be eventually. We're planning a museum that will focus on the 1920s and 1930s.
Oh, that's great.
As experienced in Montauk. So, 2 great decades where a lot of stuff was going on here between the, rum running and the Roaring '20s and Carl Fisher's massive development of Montauk. And then, of course, followed by, the Depression, and rumblings of war and so on and so forth. It was a really interesting time, and Montauk certainly changed a lot in those 2 decades very rapidly. Carl Fisher put in the sort of basic, the infrastructure that we still enjoy today. So he created the harbor by blasting out the lake and allowing boats to come in there, and we have a nice safe harbor there. So it was a really exciting time here, and I think it's going to be a fantastic museum when we open. We're in early planning stages right now. But you can sort of see there are so many places. I mean, I'm very interested now in Carl Fisher's life. I mean, he was an amazing, accomplished person who, built the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, then went and developed Miami Beach. He was involved in the Lincoln Highway and the Dixie Highway, and he was a very energetic and tireless developer. And
there's a very interesting story I might tell you about that.
Please.
The 6-story building that he built in the center of town, which was supposed to be part of a resort that never got finished, but the building was built. On top of it was his penthouse apartment, still there.
Yeah.
A huge fireplace. I understand a painting of a bull over the bed. And he married his wife. She wrote a book about him.
Yeah.
And the book, she claimed that they were married when she was 15.
Yeah, not true. Right.
And you know the reason?
Why did she say that?
Yeah, I know the reason.
Well, I think she just wanted people to think she was younger than she was.
That's exactly right. She lived in Palm Beach and had lied about her age. And if she was 15, if she was what she said she was when she was in Palm Beach, that's the age she would have been when she got married. And I thought that's a good a note to end this on. We could talk, I think, for hours about Montauk. It's such an interesting place, and I want to thank you for coming. We ought to do this again and
Sure.
talk about later developments, particularly Fisher's, which ultimately failed.
Yeah.
And then the attempt to fly to Europe in a dirigible, and there's lots of stuff. The bombardments of the fort at Gardiner's Island by the airplanes, the airport that was where downtown Montauk was. I guess the development of the military stuff out in Montauk with the missiles and big guns out. It's a whole time. We'll do it again.
Good.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
This is going to be a wonderful, wonderful podcast for us, and appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Take care.